My name is Jack Schnur, and I am a Holocaust survivor. Until recently, I didn't even realize that I was. I thought that only people who had survived the concentration camps were Holocaust survivors. Someone who knew that I was born in France informed me that I was indeed a Holocaust survivor. This person asked me if I would be interested in giving testimony as to my experiences during World War II. At first, I didn't think I would have enough information since I was only 6 years old when the war ended. But then I recalled that my parents, who did survive, had recorded a tape of their experiences and left that tape with me and others in the family. So I'm going to be using their voices to document their experiences. And of course, it will be also my experiences. My father, Simon Schnur, was born in Krakow, Poland in 1909. In order to escape the fierce anti-Semitism there, he immigrated to France, where he had an older brother who lived in Paris and owned a butcher shop. And he worked for his brother for a while, but he was not in love with being a butcher. He had dreams of becoming a jeweler. So he got work as an apprentice jeweler in Paris. Eventually, he was able to start his own business in Paris. My father had stopped school at the age of 15 in Poland. He was the youngest of four brothers. He also had a sister. And he sent for his sister to come to Paris a few years later. My father eventually learned to speak 7 languages, most of them fluently, with very little accent. He spoke his native Polish, Hebrew, Yiddish, German, French, and eventually English as we came to America. My mother, Harriet Zupan, was born in Stockholm, Sweden in 1913. Her father was a musician and played bass in a gypsy orchestra. Her father brought the family to France when my mother was only about 8 years old, and she learned to speak French. She met my father at a dance in 1935. They were married 2 years later. So I was born in Paris on July 20th, 1939. On September 1st, Germany invaded Poland. On May 10th, 1940, Germany invaded France. They entered Paris on June 22nd. My father was drafted into the French army. The French army was no match for the German war machine, so after just a few weeks, the French army surrendered. However, that was not the case in my father's outfit.
My military authorities decided that they will not surrender to the Germans, and we continued fighting. But the Germans promised us that if we lay down our weapons, we will be sent back home. It didn't happen like that. When we laid down the arms, the unit came in with machine guns and started to shoot at random. After some 100 casualties, we were surrounded and taken to a fort in Lorraine, and for the first 3 weeks we had nothing to eat. I worked at a railroad station which we were enlarging. I went into a bunker and had prepared civilian clothes underneath my military clothes, and with another friend, a Greek fellow, we escaped. I was only captive for 6 months. It was the longest period in my life. To be exposed, to be shot, or to be arrested or deported any minute especially as a Jew.
France was divided into two parts. One, north and west, was occupied by the Germans. The rest, the so-called Free Zone in the south, was under the Vichy government, meanwhile headed by my mother stayed back in Paris, while General de Gaulle, her newborn who had refused to sign the armistice, headed the Free French troops who joined with the resistance to fight the Vichy government. Meanwhile, my mother stayed back in Paris to take care of me, her newborn child.
I didn't know what happened to my husband at all at that time. I received a card that he was a prisoner of war. When the Germans occupied France, I know where he was in the front. Many men were killed there. I didn't see him since my son was born, and we were beginning to have trouble being Jewish. When one day somebody came to my apartment and he said that I come to visit your apartment because your husband escaped and we have to look in your place if he's there. And I didn't even know that my husband escaped at that time. And I had to run during the night to the shelter with my baby, prepared every night the bottles. It was hard, really.
On my parents' wedding anniversary, December 26th, a dramatic turn of event took place.
It was sad. Somebody came to me. It was my nephew. He said, you know, we have a visitor at home, and we would like you to come over with Jackie our son. And I was, having a feeling that maybe it's him. He said, yes, your husband is at our home. So I first get dressed, put the baby in, and we went to my sister. And then I saw my husband. I didn't see him for a long time. He didn't see his son since he was a small baby. And I was teaching my son to say Papa. And I show him when he was at home, my husband, gave me a picture of him. And I show my son, you see, this is your daddy. So every son that he saw in the street, he was crying. He said, Daddy, Daddy. He thought every soldier was his father, but this time he came to my sister, but my husband was not dressed as a soldier. He was dressed in civilian. And he said, you're not my daddy. My daddy is a soldier. We couldn't stay together. He couldn't come home. He couldn't even stay in my sister's place. Some of our friends gave us a little apartment that was empty that they know about. We met there like we were lovers, so like somebody we have to hide, somebody took care of my baby, and we met there like we had a date, and only for a night or two because he couldn't stay in Paris. He had to go away in the not occupied side of France. 2 days later he left already, and he said, don't worry, I will be in touch with you now, and we will be together, all three of us, for always.
A few years before my mother passed away, she told me a story I'd like to share with you. She told me that some of her Jewish friends had told her that they were planning to go to Spain for safety because Spain was not occupied by the Germans at the time. But it would be a very dangerous endeavor. They would have to go as a group and sneak in through the Pyrenees Mountains. She considered going with that group and taking me along, and had actually agreed to go. The night before she was to join them, she got cold feet and decided not to go. It turns out that everyone who went to Spain in that group was caught and was either killed or sent to concentration camps. So then my mother decided to go to the free zone in France with the hope of rejoining with my father. But of course, she couldn't cross the border legally as a Jew.
I only have my identification paper over marked Jewish, and I waited to 3 months before I could go, and then I find somebody who helped me to go on the other side. It wasn't easy to go through the woods. He had to carry my valise and my baby. I couldn't even breathe that day. I was so scared. Anyway, I made it.
After my father's visit to Paris to see my mother and myself, he explains how he got to the free zone.
I took a train and got off at the wrong station where the Germans were waiting for me. Chief of the train took me and led me out to the amazement of the Germans. He was from the better French people. Then I passed the sort of frontier between occupied and non-occupied France. But I had someone who led me, who knew when the German sentries were crossing.
My father settled in Limoges, which is famous for porcelain, and he eventually got work as a jeweler. Now, my father's older brother, Samuel Schnur, was still in Paris working in his butcher shop. But things were getting to be very dangerous for Jews in Paris, and my father was able to send for him to come and see him in Limoges. He wanted to try to persuade him to come back and bring his family there.
I pleaded with him, so he went back, and unfortunately, he was taken by the Germans, and we never heard of him again.
Samuel Schnur and his wife and their son, Henri, who was only 10 years old at the time, were taken to Auschwitz. They perished there. But their son, Henri, survived. In 1945, as the camps were liberated, Henri found a home with my family. Eventually, the Germans took over the free zone as well, so it was no longer safe for us to stay there. My parents found refuge with my Aunt Juliette's family. Her husband was a Frenchman, and he was not Jewish, who at very great risk hid us from the Germans. Many French people saved Jews, and we owe them a great deal of gratitude. My father recalls that time.
And this was in the worst part of France, in Orléans, which was bombarded day and night. We figured that this is the only spot where the Germans will not bother us. We stayed 3 months. The Allies then landed and liberated us. I went to meet them, and the funniest part was when I saw them camping, I saw a fellow sitting on a jeep and reading a Jewish newspaper. I could not speak English at the time. I was with Gentile people, and they complimented me how good my English is. It was thrilling. It was something. I cried when I saw them, but my heart was full of hopes, and I knew that that was the end of the trauma.
We were so happy to be rid of the Germans, and then we wanted to live a normal life. And right away he wanted another baby. He didn't even ask me the permission. And he said, oh no, now another child has to be between us. And we had a little girl, and she was wonderful.
I'd like to close with a tribute to my uncle and aunt who perished in Auschwitz, and of course their son Henri, who survived.